The science fiction writer William Gibson said that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Well, being here in Norway at the Exchange makes me feel like I am visiting the future, a future I want to live in, a future that understands that purpose and profit are the most powerful and authentic expression of capitalism. A future that understands that purpose and profit are natural force multipliers and partners when you take the long view. And that fills me with great hope, especially at a time when it feels like humanity is at an inflection point and when we're facing so much uncertainty globally. The digital world is reshaping our physical world and is changing how we work, how we play, and even what it means to be a social human being. And we're realizing that as bits go, so do atoms. It's a reminder that digital technologies may actually be the most powerful tools we've ever invented. And we are amongst the privileged few that hold them in our hands. And while they've given us a modern world that we marvel at, we also have begun to question whether they may lead to our demise. The unprecedented velocity of change, technological, ideological, societal, leaves most of us reeling, and it's leaving a lot of us behind. And we look on with shock and awe, rejoicing and despairing at how technology amplifies the highest side of our nature and our darkest impulses. And some of us wonder if we're at a crossroads of utopian and dystopian futures. And it leaves us in this endless debate with each other and ourselves as to whether things are better than they've ever been before or worse than ever. And the answer always seems to be a resounding yes. Virtually everything's being refactored. The way that we connect and communicate, the way that we make love, Tinder, anyone, or war, the way that we govern ourselves, whether we govern ourselves, the way we work, whether we work. And if the future of work is that work is finished, then maybe our identities are also being refactored too. It's raising some very basic questions like, who am I? What's my identity? Who is in my tribe? Who has a right to belong? And what is the story of us? And yet somehow against this backdrop of accelerating change, marketplaces are a constant. In fact, marketplaces have existed for as long as human beings have. And they are how human beings fundamentally collaborate and trade. As technologists, as entrepreneurs, and as business leaders, there are some questions that are being begged. What is our higher purpose in this world? What is our role in building a good society? What does responsible innovation in this era mean? How do we bring more of our humanity to the way that we do business and innovate? And how do we, conversely, bring innovation and business to all of humanity? Well, I've come to believe that the answer to those questions lies in our most deeply held values and beliefs, and in our dreams, because one dream can transform a million, even a billion realities. And if you think about it, that's all that ever has. And that's the most hopeful truth that I know. History has shown us time and again that those who dream most boldly shape our future. It's true for individuals, for startups, for corporations, and for nations even. And it's why dreams are considered such serious business in Silicon Valley. Connecting the dots on my own life helped me understand how much dreams had shaped my journey, a journey that's brought me to the front lines of the tech revolution, and a journey that began on the front lines of war. Dreams that were born out of my heritage as a Coptic Egyptian, as a survivor of war, as a refugee, and as an immigrant. The war was Black September, what's come to be known as the most brutal and bloody war in the Middle East. And it came without warning and brought a great darkness to our door. We came home and found out we had become human shields to the rebel soldiers who had made a home on the roof of ours. And when the bombs and the bullets would come for us, we would run to a hole in the ground. And we'd sit in that darkness not knowing what was going to happen to us. Minutes would become hours, and hours became days. And when we came out, everything familiar to us had been torn apart. I remember finding bullets in the headboard of my parents' bed, of opening the closet door and seeing bullet holes in my sister's dress. My last memory of Black September was running with my classmates. One moment we were running to play, and the next minute we were running for our lives as Army tanks opened fire on our one-room schoolhouse. I found myself running alone, terrified I'd never see my family again, and I was 5 years old, but I was one of the lucky ones. We were reunited, and we escaped into the countryside, and we eventually made our way to Beirut. Civil war quickly found its way to our door again. And again, we were the lucky ones. We escaped. And this time we found refuge in the United States. And we brought great hope for building a new life in a new land. But I quickly saw that hope turn to struggle. My parents were educated and resourceful, but they couldn't find work. We didn't have a place to live. And there were very generous people who helped us at crucial times. There was always a look in their eyes I didn't understand, an expression on my parents' face I'd never seen before. It's taken me the better part of a lifetime to realize that that look in those kind people's eyes was pity, that the expression on my parents' face was watching their dignity being chipped away. It's also taken me the better part of a lifetime to understand that just because your situation is broken, it doesn't mean that you are. And conversely, just because your situation is extraordinary, it doesn't mean that you are. Now, I often think about that classroom, and I wonder what happened to my classmates. What I've come to believe is that the access to opportunity I received is likely the most important difference between us as human beings. And I'm reminded of that every time I see struggle. I wonder how lack of fair access has shaped that person's identity and their sense of possibility and their dreams. When I see images of refugees today, I'm reminded of the running and the fleeing, and I'm reminded of the fine line that divides us, a line I believe we all walk. My story isn't unique. It is a story of 65 million people who have faced war and violence and persecution today, more than at any time in the past 7 decades and in all of World War II. And I have come to believe that we have entered an era of permanent displacement. I use my voice to tell the story because they can't. And I also tell that story because those experiences made me dream of a better future, of a future I wanted to live in. And those dreams gave me hope and a sense of possibility. I dreamt of a world that understands that the near enemy of compassion is pity. I dreamt of a world that regards dignity as an inalienable human right. And I dreamt of a world that understands that talent is universal, but opportunity isn't. Most of all, I dreamt of a world that understands that a cornerstone of justice is fair access. And I came to Silicon Valley with those dreams and a computer science degree and a belief that technology could enable that kind of fair access, that maybe, just maybe, it could put a little bit of power into the hands of people who didn't have it, people like my family. That was the future I wanted to help create. A future that has become a growing part of our present. Today, half the planet has access to the world's body of information, and virtually every human being can communicate with every other, bringing us one massive step closer to a more just, free, and abundant world. And it's evidence that technology is perhaps the most democratizing force in the history of humankind. There are almost as many cell phone subscriptions as people on the planet, 1.5 billion more than have access to a toilet. It took about 25 years for that to happen. 3.5 billion people have access to the internet, over 2 billion are on Facebook. It took about 10 years for that to happen. We live in a global digital village where what used to only be possible locally is now global, and what's global feels local. And it's reminding us of how interconnected we are. And that realization is at once inspiring and overwhelming, or terrifying even. One of the greatest losses of human potential and injustices is that half the world's population lives on less than $2 a day. And together that half owns just 1% of all the assets. Many of them are entrepreneurs. Most of them are entrepreneurs out of necessity. And despite the adversity that they face, they are the hardest working, most resourceful and resilient people on earth. And banks have long turned their back on them, as you heard from Axion yesterday. And the mass scale inequality constitutes a global opportunity crisis that in some ways is actually growing. It's interesting, for those of us who won the birth lottery, and I count myself in that group, we never actually have to think about this. It's a hard reality to grasp, and it's easy to disconnect from. It's hard to reconcile an economic system that benefits us so greatly, yet leaves out over half the world's population. And one way to think about this is as a distribution problem, where abundance is highly concentrated in a few parts of the world, and scarcity is widespread elsewhere. It's a highly solvable problem. One that we set out to solve 11 years ago. Kiva, seems like it was 100 years ago, but Kiva was founded on the simple idea to use the internet to connect people through a lending marketplace. Our goal was to democratize access to capital and give people fair access. We also hoped that a marketplace would help reframe the way the world saw people, not as poor, but as dignified, inventive entrepreneurs. People that didn't need a hand out, but needed a hand up the way we all do. We ended up inventing the first crowdfunding marketplace. Now today crowdfunding is very commonplace, but at the time, the idea that people would crowdsource small amounts of money, send that money to strangers, that money would actually reach them, that they would actually repay it, that money would actually make a difference in their lives, well, it all seemed like a terribly idealistic and implausible idea, and it certainly couldn't scale. In its first year, Kiva delivered $1 million in loans from 3,000 lenders. And today, $1 million in loans is made every 3 to 4 days. A loan is made every 4 to 5 seconds. Today, nearly 3 million entrepreneurs living in the riskiest parts of the world, including the United States, have received over $1 billion in dignity-building loans. And those loans have been funded by citizen lenders like us across 190 countries. 97% of those loans have been repaid in full. It's a repayment rate that banks can only dream of. And it's flipped the conventional wisdom of lending and risk on its head. Over 80% of them are women. Women like Kiva's first borrower, Elizabeth Omala, or as I like to think of Elizabeth as the godmother of crowdfunding. Elizabeth is a fishmonger in Uganda, and she's a widowed mother of 5, and she couldn't afford to send her children to school, but she had a dream about how to scale her business and make it more profitable. And a $500 loan crowdsourced by five people allowed her to do that. She bought bus fare to go to Lake Victoria, where she bought fish directly from the fishermen, cutting out the middleman in her town, and a small refrigerator that allowed her to buy greater volumes of fish. In under a year, she'd repaid her loan and had begun sending her children to school. It's women like the sewing co-op from Cambodia that were made up of sex trafficking survivors that with a $700 loan are rebuilding their lives one sewing machine at a time. And when no bank would give her a loan, 40 people from all over the world took a bet on Teresa Goins' dream to start a youth-run supper club in the most dangerous part of San Francisco, all because she wanted to give former gang members and kids who tangled with the law a second chance. It's also men like Erastus Kamani from Maragua, Kenya, who at 73 years old, a retired school teacher, he became an entrepreneur because he wants to send his 6 daughters not just to school, but to college. And it's men like Troy who started a solar business in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And because women reinvest 90% of their incomes in others, Kiva is helping remind all of us that the fastest way to transform a society is by investing in women, because first these loans start by changing their lives as entrepreneurs, then their families, then their communities, ultimately planting the seeds that can change the fate of a region or a nation even. And in a world that threatens to divide us, marketplaces like Kiva unite us. They help remind us that we are all part of one tribe, the human tribe. I also know that in a world where women's hands do 66% of the work, grow 50% of our food, and yet earn only 10% of the income, and own 1% of the land, our work has just begun. And my dream today is to scale the Kiva marketplace to reach 1 billion entrepreneurs. But more important than that Kiva works, that even works at scale, is that it's given way to a $1 trillion industry filled with thousands of crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending marketplaces. It's a new kind of capital, connected capital. A world's bank that is for and by the people, democratizing access to idle capital sitting on the sidelines in a radically decentralized and crucially equitable way, grassroots, bottoms up. It speaks to the power that's unleashed when purpose and profit are aligned, that what's good for the world can be good for the bottom line and vice versa. And the best of Silicon Valley knows that you don't win hearts and minds by talking about financials. We know that shifting from a money story of value extraction to a meaning story of value creation does. We find that purpose brings out the best in people and attracts the very best talent. It's why we often talk about mission versus mercenary-driven cultures. We know that both can be financially successful. We also know mission-driven cultures tend to be better places to work because they engender a fierce sense of loyalty and pride amongst employees and customers. Often they create movements, often they become enduring institutions. And often the greatest entrepreneurs become some of the world's greatest change agents. It's why we draw such great inspiration from Elon Musk's audacious dream to save humanity from extinction through renewable energy and interplanetary space travel. And when he says he wants to die on Mars, but just not on impact, we take that as evidence of real commitment to his dream. But in a world in great need of answers and to very large questions, Elon's is a reminder that no dream is too bold. A key reason why top talent is attracted to Silicon Valley is because there is that permission to dream boldly, to take risks, to fail, to try again without the stigma of failure. And the younger people are, the more they expect, especially the millennials, which we like to talk about so much. They have made explicit our universal hunger for meaning. They insist on a meaningful connection with the companies they work for, buy from, invest in. Half of them have ruled out working for a company because of values or conduct. 9 out of 10 insist that businesses should be measured by more than financial performance. And that's a big deal because they've inherited $41 trillion in wealth. We may be their bosses, but they are fast becoming our future leaders, and they are our teachers. They're teaching us to think in terms of impact instead of productivity. But most of all, they're teaching us to insist on work that is worthy of our lives. When we shape a company's culture and values, we shape our culture at large. And because businesses have become the biggest actors in the world, we have a profound opportunity to build companies that are incubators for a good society. Imagine a world where businesses compete on being the best for the world and where that's what makes them the best in the world. And in the same way that Norway's most deeply held values and beliefs have set a high bar that is admired the world over, I believe that you all here are uniquely positioned to help shape that narrative. So as you connect and collaborate and trade in today's marketplace, I hope you'll join me in asking and answering, How can we align our vision, our dream for business and technology with a vision that's in service to all of humanity? The future we're co-creating depends on it, and ultimately our own humanity depends on it too. One dream can transform a million, even a billion realities. It's the only thing that ever has. And that's the most hopeful truth I know. Thank you.